Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Yes, it's really happening. I finally finished a What If. Crazy, I know. But I've worked incredibly hard on this and I really hope you guys enjoy what I've come up with. I promise that part 2 to What If Kestrel Saves Sky is coming soon, so no need to worry. Been focusing on this one because it's an old patron's choice What If, and I'm so sorry it's long overdue. But just a rookie, I hope you enjoy this one. This video does contain major spoilers for Darkstalker Legends, so if you haven't yet read that book, then please click off. Also, before we begin, a huge shout out to my patrons! 3 Moons and DarkLover95. Thank you both so much for supporting me. Links to their social medias are in the description down below. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the video. Clearsight still couldn't shake off the aching pain of losing Darkstalker. Flying off the ground of the continent she had known and loved and fought to protect was harder than she ever could have imagined. No vision could prepare her for the feeling of what would come next, but Clearsight tried to remind herself why she needed to leave. These dragons are in trouble, and I'm the only one who can save them. Clearsight had spent hours sitting next to the lifeless body of her lover. He didn't look like he was asleep, blissfully away from reality. He looked gone. Like an empty shell of the charming and lovable dragon she once knew. But if Clearsight was being honest, Darkstalker had looked that way even before the spell. The young Nightwing was bombarded by seemingly endless visions where it felt like an eternity. They flashed before her eyes, full of chaos. Some were of Clearsight never leaving his side, dying as Darkstalker continued to take his slow breaths. But others were of her never releasing him at all, and she saw that they were hopeless. She watched as the sky grew darker, hearing rumbling above her head. And that's when it happened. When the first droplet of rain touched her scales, Clearsight's newfound peace from leaving Darkstalker's side to sit beneath the heavens was shattered. The moment that tear from the sky met her dry scales was the moment when everything changed. Clearsight had never seen a vision that felt so terrible. It struck like burning lightning through her mind, unraveling any web of the future she thought she could have seen before. Flashes of a dark future appeared before her, and Clearsight could barely make out what she was seeing at first. But when she did, the Nightwing Dragonette couldn't misinterpret what she was seeing. This isn't Pyria. The vision began with flashes of smiley, happy dragons with strange scales. They were like nothing she had seen before, even the hybrids she saw in False Futures. These dragons were something different entirely. Clearsight saw the dark, stormy clouds approaching the shore slowly, almost methodically. They were unaware of their doom. Because they wanted to scream, cry out, anything to save them. But they couldn't see the destruction it would soon cause. When the first lightning strike hit, their joy was ripped away from them in an instant. And that's when the true chaos began to unfold. Clearsight watched as trees were ripped from their roots, egregious and tempestuous winds no dragon could ever imagine tearing everything apart. No one could run. The storm seemed to last an eternity, so long that even those on the furthest side of the strange new continent were now lost to sea or drowned in the flood. The sounds of laughter from mere days before were now replaced with silence. There was nothing. No life, no happiness, no dragons. Clearsight felt no shame with the tears rolling down her cheeks. How could something so horrible happen to such innocent dragons? If they would have known, would their lives been able to be saved from such a disaster? That's when an idea struck her. What if she warned them? Clearsight sat beneath the pouring rain for a long time. She had no idea if this was even real. In fact, her visions had stopped after that one. She couldn't even search through any future in her mind. From the images of the rolling clouds and incoming winds, she had seen the path the storm had taken from the coast of Pyria. She had seen how it had moved across the ocean, and the islands in between. She had seen a path one she would never forget. I don't care if there's a possibility this isn't real, Clearsight thought to herself. Even just knowing this could happen is devastating. My tribe is safe. My continent is safe. I can't let any dragon suffer like I have. So if it means I sacrifice my life to save dragons I don't know a single thing about, I'll take that chance. Remembering the smiles on the faces of the strange, happy dragons left Clearsight with no doubts. She was going to save them. She was going to save them all before they died. Clearsight's wings flapped against the raging winds of the sea, looking back to only catch a glimpse of the dark sky far, far behind her. Part of her wondered if that was the storm that would bring the destruction. She was faster than it was, and that meant she stood a chance. Every bone and muscle in Clairside's body ached, but inside of her wasn't much different. She caught herself wondering about Whiteout and Indigo and Fathom. Were they okay? She knew it was probably silly. Of course they're fine. They're some of the strongest dragons I know. They'd probably laugh if they knew I was worrying about them like that. But even those thoughts didn't make Clairside feel any better. She frowned as she remembered the visions she had seen only a day ago outside Darkstalker's tomb, now a part of her wondering if maybe other visions of Pyria would change. But she had still seen nothing. Her mind felt empty with just her thoughts. There were no visions, no security, and no certainty. She felt like she was swimming in the river of the future, where she had no control over its rapids. All she could go off of was the final future she had seen, the memories of visions from long ago. Clairside traveled the small speck of an island she could see. She laid down her wings, carefully landing on the sandy isle. She felt her eyes droop closed within minutes, exhaustion winning for the day. What she failed to notice was a storm approaching quicker than before. Clairside had no idea how long she had been lost in sleep for, because the moment she looked up, she was met with the same pounding sunlight or embracing warmth. The sky was dark, but not that of the night. There were clouds, large, black, menacing clouds. Her heart began to pound the moment she heard the first roar of thunder. Clairside had never felt so hopeless without her visions. All she could do was continue traveling along the path she could remember, though dread seemed to find its way, crawling beneath her scales, itching closer and closer to her heart, like the booming of the thunder was. As Clairside flew, the storm seemed to follow her. Large raindrops began to pelt her scales, almost as if the sky was trying to drag her down, for the ocean to swallow her whole. She squinted as the droplets splashed across her face. Just keep going forward. She had no idea how long it would take to reach the other continent, but maybe if she tried outflying the storm, then she could beat it like before. Keep flying, Clairside. You have to save these dragons. Everything was at odds against her, but still the young Nightwing flew. Through the haze and the fog, she could barely make out the land ahead. The world around her was so loud. The splattering rain, the lightning strikes in the nearby water seemed to screech in her ears. Everything got loud, 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 until one final boom, a flash of light, and everything went black. Clairside embraced the darkness as her tired and electrified wings came crashing down. Tarantula had been standing guard at the entrance to the abyss of the Spiderwing Kingdom when he heard a terrible roar of thunder and saw a blinding streak of lightning flash across the sky. He hated when it rained. For once, he was actually jealous of the dragons living inside the volcano. At least they had some shelter right now. Tarantula wondered what it felt like to not fall asleep to the soothing water dripping from a stalactite. Wondered if any of the Magma Wings wondered about his kingdom like he wondered about theirs. All he knew about those dwelling inside the towering volcano that dominated the landscape was what he gathered from cave carvings, which wasn't a lot considering his tribe's bias on the matter. Tarantula was about to descend into further daydreams, the only thing a Spiderwing entry guard could do in keeping watch alone, when he noticed a tiny black dot in the distance. Lightning seemed to strike it midair, and was now tumbling down onto the rocky shoreline. What the? Tarantula hesitated, looking back on the entry hall of the abyss. Curiosity always got the better of him, which is why he assumed his tribe even left him out to guard in the first place. If Magwing just so happened to come out of the sky and vent out their fury by burning him alive in a fiery blaze, no one would truly miss him. There'd be more silence and less questions, which everyone would be grateful for. After all, Tarantula was supposed to guard the kingdom from any Magwing intruders, basically sentenced to a boring life out in the cold. There's always a centuries-old legend about a strange dragon coming to save the kingdom from their sworn enemy and next-door neighbors. Was that a Magwing that fell from the sky? Tarantula could hardly tell, but he wouldn't want to just let this dragon die, even if it was his tribe's supposed enemy. Tarantula had never quite understood why all Magwings were evil like everyone told him, but he found it best to keep his mouth shut. He had already questioned the elders enough. So without a second thought, Tarantula took off in the stormy sky with his 4 wings, raindrops burying themselves into his fuzzy scales. If they won't tell me about our enemy, then I'll find out myself. Part of him hoped it was a Magma Wing so he could see what they were really like. Clairside felt nothing until suddenly everything hit her all at once. A sharp, stinging pain stabbed into her side. Through squinted eyes she could see blood steadily dripping from a wound near her right wing. When she tried opening her eyes, she was met with searing pain near her forehead. Clarissa wanted to roll over and keep her eyes closed forever, but a small talon started poking her side. She opened her heavy eyelids again to see 8 beady black eyes staring down at her. The dragon blinked quizzically, looking somewhat relieved that its poking method actually worked. Clarissa had never truly seen anything like what stood before her. 3 sets of wings, 6 legs, fuzzy brown and black scales, and early curved horns. He looked like the spider she'd rescued at school, much to listeners' opposition, only large and scaly enough to be a dragon. His curious but sympathetic eyes blinked up at her. Clarissa knew one thing for certain. This was nothing like the dragon she had seen from her vision. She craned her neck to the side, only to see that they were all alone. "Thank you for saving me," she said in an attempt to break the silence. The dragon jumped backwards in surprised confusion. She almost felt the need to facepalm. Of course he can't understand me. The strange dragon squinted his 2 largest eyes, examining her closely. But after a moment of doing so, he opened his mouth. "You're welcome. I knew you were probably a magwing, but I didn't see any markings." Suddenly, he covered his mouth with 2 of his talons. "Oh, I'm sorry. They're probably very mean to you about that, aren't they?" The strange dragon frowned, stepping back to give Clearsight some space. "How can you understand what I'm saying?" "I'm sorry. I probably startled you with that, didn't I? I can speak the magwing language. Everyone always told me it was a waste of time to try and understand you guys, because you just try to kill me instead of using your words. But I didn't see much harm in it. After all, if I'm supposed to protect my tribe against those from the volcano, shouldn't I know what they're trying to say to me before they attack?" Clearsight was frozen for a moment, delving deep into her own thoughts. She really wished her foresight was working. She wondered about all the different futures for this dragon. Clearsight hoped they were happy ones. "I'm not sure what a magwing commoner would be doing outside the volcano, though I'm sure you could explain that to me." "I'm not a magwing," Clarissa began. "I'm a nightwing, from the distant kingdoms. Have you ever heard of it?" The spider dragon covered his mouth again, his eyes nearly tearing. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." "What's wrong?" Her response only seemed to make him sadder. "They're going to leave you outside, the poor dragon." Then, muttering to himself, he added, "They exile the crazy ones. Oh, she doesn't know. Within less than a day, she'll suffocate out here. I should have noticed her having no ventilator. She must have either hit her head really hard after she was struck, or was loony enough to exile in the first place." Clarissa's confusion only seemed to grow, but her body ached as the rain poured on her scales. The spider dragon took notice of her soft groan, nearly facepalming himself. "I should get you inside. I know no one would be keen to see you, but I can't just leave you out here. Those wounds look concerning." He frowned, furrowing his brow as though he was deep in thought. "There's a cave near the highest level of the abyss that I can take you to. Can you fly?" Clearsight shook her head. The pain only seemed to worsen, inky black spots taking over her vision. She felt safe enough in the strange dragon's presence to lose consciousness, despite the fact that he had only known her for a few minutes. Clearsight felt as though she could see into a dragon without her foresight, and reach into places it couldn't. His heart seemed good. And with that, the whole world faded to black, but not before noticing a weird shape in the sky that her savior failed to see. When Clearsight awoke, she found herself feeling warm. Silk was laid over her body and wrapped around one of her deeper wounds. She felt as though it was a blanket on her. The spider dragon heard her stirring and quickly walked over to her side. He sat down, looking a tad bit uncomfortable. "Okay, so after comparing you to the Ard the Magwings from the cave drawings up here, I can say for sure that you are not one of them. You're breathing without a ventilator, which in and of itself is a miracle. So, what are you?" Clearsight brushed some loose silk strands off her scales, facing the dragon. "I'm Clearsight the Nightwing, and I come from afar. There are dragons I need to save, but they don't look like you. I was on my way to save them from a terrible storm when I found myself here. I am so grateful for your help." He tilted his head, staring at every inch of Clearsight with curiosity. "So you really aren't a magwing," he muttered, though more to himself. Suddenly, his face lit up with an emotion Clearsight had never seen before. "Oh my Silk, you're the great savior! The dragon jumped up excitedly, his body filled with vigor. What? The great savior. The dragon has been prophesied to fly down from above and save us from our oppressors. With her, the island will be ours. He paused for a moment. Though I have to admit, your entrance here wasn't as graceful as the prophecy suggested. You know, I thought flying from the sky wasn't falling from the sky, but maybe it got lost in translation. A large but curious grin took up his entire face. I, Tarantula the Spider-Wing Watchguard, found and helped the great savior! Clearsight hated to ruin his excitement, but she didn't want to claim she was somebody she was not. I'm sorry, Dragon from Netherland. I'm not your savior. His smile vanished and was replaced by noticeable disappointment. Then who are you? Clearsight told Tarantula all about her vision and ability to see into the future, even though it felt dormant inside her now. She told him about the strange dragons from another continent who would be swept away by the storm, and how she felt compelled to help them. He took it all in, silent but listening. What's your world like? He asked after a long silence. Here is a great home. It has so many dragons that you can only ever dream of seeing. There's so much color and life, even in the darkness. She twinged as she thought of Darkstalker. Tarantula sat in awe. Asperia sounded amazing. So different from the volcanic island and the abyss he had grown up in. A world where there were colors other than gray. It sounded like a fairy tale. I wish I was the dragon for your prophecy, Clearsight said. But they're dragons I have to save. Dragons that will die if I cannot reach them soon. She tried sitting up and felt how her muscles were slowly regaining their strength. Tarantula answered her question before she could even ask it. Our silk has healing properties. It can save dragons from exterior wounds. But as for internal ones, death does not fight us once. Clearsight looked at him with twinkling, curious eyes. Spider-Wings live 2 lives, he explained. When you feel your first one is finished, you wrap yourself up in silk. After 2 weeks, you get your body back, and you live again. You keep your memories and your strength, but you feel new. The wound of death is gone, until after another 100 years it takes you for good that time. Clearsight had never thought of death as a wound before. She wondered how it felt like to live 2 lives, your body fighting for one final time. At the same time, Clearsight was grateful she had the time she did. I'm only on my first life, Tarantula explained. But eventually, it'll be my time to be reborn, and maybe I'll like that. Just for now, be grateful for the one you do get to live. He smiled at her, and Clearsight couldn't help but give back the gesture. You can call me Tar, by the way. It's been great to meet you, Tar. I can say the same, Clearsight. The two chatted for a little while more, though exhaustion got the best of them both. They fell asleep, Clearsight on the woven silk bed made for her, and Tarantula on the chair of his desk, once deep in thought. The peaceful dripping of water droplets from the ceiling stalactites soothed Clearsight into a deep, dreamless sleep. Tarantula wondered what he would do with her. Though there was no indication of daytime through stray rays of sunlight, Clearsight found herself awakening and aware it was morning. Tarantula was at his desk, carving into a slab of rock. When he noticed she was awake, he cheerfully smiled at her and motioned for her to come to him. I drew you, he said sheepishly. For scientific reasons, I mean. His face seemed to flush red at Clearsight's unjudging smirk. I've never seen any Nightwings before, so I thought that by preserving this moment, I might be doing something. What do you think? Did I do you justice? The drawing inscribed onto the stone tablet was gorgeous. Clearsight thought that her poise and grandeur in the artwork was definitely an exaggeration, but she couldn't help but admire it. Her black and purple scales were colored in by smushed chalk, bringing her piece to life. It looked more like something in a museum than a scientific sketch. It's wonderful, Tar. He smiled, shaking away the embarrassment. Thank you. I tried. The moment was interrupted by the flapping of wings and the scraping of rock outside the carved alcove. Tarantula nearly jumped out of his chair with a sound. Tarantula, what are you doing in here? You should be outside. A large, gray, 8-eyed dragon came flying in through the large opening. He had scars across his face and looked withered and old like an ancient stone sculpture. The moment he saw Clearsight, he flinched in surprise. What is that doing in here? He growled, showing his fangs as they dripped with an inky purple substance. Hey, she's not a Magwing! I promise! The large dragon hesitated, hovering midair. He had every square inch of clear sight before he looked back at Tarantula again. He clearly noticed her lack of a ventilator and markings. "Then what is it?" he asked through gritted teeth and squinted eyes. "'Cause I feel like killing it." Tarantula rushed in between the two. "She's leaving. She's a visitor." "You didn't answer my question, thug. Move out of the way before I squash you like one." "No," Tarantula objected, moving closer to the figure. "She's a friend. Just let me explain before you start biting. Orbweaver, please." Large dragon, Orbweaver, Clearsight had learned, grunted before finally landing on the smooth stone floor. "I found her outside last night. She said she's from a place called Pyria, and she's here to help some dragons." "Sounds like a magma who can't get their story right," he grumbled. "At least you're going to come here, act like you know the legend." "She's not the great savior or a magma wing." "Then she's trouble." Tarantula winced, finally giving a glance back at his new friend. His eyes twitched uneasily. Orbweaver groaned, finally giving in. "All right, well, if you're so insistent on having her stay, then she'd better be taken to the Queen. This magwing will have a lot of answering to do, if she doesn't die without a ventilator on the way there." Before Clearsight could even respond, Tarantula grabbed her arm and motioned for her to follow. Her wings still slightly ached, but she hated removing the gently wrapped silk. But she still followed, and the three dragons flew deep into the darkness of the abyss below. Clearsight's eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light. It had seemed like hours of flying, past my many carved alcoves where spider dragons gawked at her, before they finally reached the bottom of the abyss. Is this where their queen lives? She wondered. The question was answered almost instantly, as the three dragons approached an empty throne. It's a large structure made out of bones, held together by dusty silk. "The Queen will be with us soon," Orbweaver said. "For now, get comfortable." Clearsight looked over at Tarantula for an explanation, but he only silently shrugged. It wasn't until she took her eyes off the throne that Clearsight noticed dragons in the shadows, hissing softly at her. They flashed their sharp fangs like Orbweaver had done, and she took the hint to look away. There were dozens of them, some hanging from stalactites from above, peacefully asleep, and others stalking from the shadows, one eye always on the young Nightwing. They spoke softly to each other in whispers from a language Clearsight could not understand. Whatever they were saying looked like it worried Tarantula, and he shuddered. After what felt like an eternity in so many gazes, a loud sound stopped the silent whispers. The Queen of the Spiderwings appeared from a faraway room, shuffling to the decaying throne. She was larger than any dragon Clearsight had ever seen. Her beady, judging black eyes felt like looking in the depths of the ocean, where only the toughest and darkest of life could be found. Four ginormous fangs hung out of her mouth, which made a sound similar to that of a rattlesnake. The Queen talked to Tarantula and Orbweaver in that same unfamiliar language, though finally someone spoke what she could understand. "You," the Queen's raspy voice said, pointing a jagged and bony talon towards Clearsight. "Are you truly from afar?" "I am, Your Highness. I am from a land called Pyria. I flew from there many days ago, starting a journey to save dragons, that I knew needed help." The Queen sat on that thought for a moment, letting out raspy breaths, the only sound that could be heard in the now deafeningly silent room. "Why come here?" Queen Silk finally asked. "I was struck down by lightning mid-flight. I did not come here to disturb you, and I'm sorry for any trouble my presence has caused." Again, the Queen stared at her in silence, deep in thought. "Great Savior?" she asked at last. "No, I'm afraid I'm not." "Liar," the Queen whispered. Clearsight shook her head, but Queen Silk took no notice. "Why do you lie? Why do you say you did not come here to save us?" "I'm sorry," Clearsight said. "My visions never told me anything about this place. Wish I would have known what was going on in your home. But there are dragons out there, dragons that will soon be dead if I cannot reach them. I have been saved by you all, and for that I am forever grateful. But if I can't get to those dragons, they will have no tomorrow." "Vision? Future seer?" the Queen asked. "Yes, Before Clearsight could say another word, a loud boom shook the cave. All the nearby dragons cried out softly, looking around in wild confusion and panic. Queen Silk looked up, frowning. Tarantula stood frozen in horror as he inched towards Clearsight. Fire shot down in the cave faster than a dragon could blink. Screams finally could be heard from higher up, The winds from the dragons around her drowned them out. 2 large shapes flew down, scorching everything in sight. Queen Silk cried out in terror, her massive body shielding those closest to the throne. Flying sparks in the fire hit Clearsight's wing, letting out a soft sizzle. Stalactites were falling as dragons lost their grips, bringing them down with them. The figures stopped midair as they looked wildly around, and Clearsight got a glimpse as they were illuminated by the fire. They were each round, one darker and one lighter. The scales on their sides and underbellies were what Clearsight paid attention to the most. Each one had a natural artwork imprinted on their scales. The slightly smaller of the two had gray scales like swirls of smoke around both of his eyes. Scale smoke trails led up from his underbelly to the middle of his chest. They each wore thick ventilators around their mouths that were filled with ashy smoke. Clearsight could make out their raspy, heavy breathing from the masks amidst the chaos. The larger of the two had scale-colored patterns, and like thick magma rolling down a hilly mountain. They weren't the product of paint. They were like natural artwork. Beautiful. Realization struck Clearsight like lightning. These are the magma wings that Tar was talking about before. Why have they come here now? Why herd all these dragons? After noticing Clearsight, the pair stopped while hovering midair. He could barely make out what they were saying over the crackling flames and wretched screams of dying dragons, but could faintly recognize bits and pieces. The savior dragon. The skinny one is with her. The two suddenly shot down from above after exchanging glances, and they were headed right towards the throne. Warweaver's eyes grew wide as he jumped in front of Clearsight, Tarantula, and the Queen, but let out a startling yowl as the hairs of his scales were singed. The larger of the intruders tackled into the cold sun floor and let out his fury in a swirling spiral of fire. Warweaver screamed, falling to the side where he lay motionless. His previously gray scales were now a hideously charred black. Clearsight nearly covered her mouth in horror. If her visions had shown her this, none of these dragons would have died. The voices of the magwings were much clearer as the noise started to die down, but even then, Clearsight could hardly hear their voices from the ringing pulse in her ears. We'll grab the black one. What about their queen? Burly Magwing moved over to see her, enraged and baring her fangs. You know what Queen Ashfall wants to do with Silk. Leave her here and see what she's done to her tribe, and we'll come back for her later. Queen's orders. All right, the other one said. What about the small, weird one? Pointed to Talon of Tarantula, who was now to the floor in fear. Any hope he had of appearing invisible in the presence of the Queen and Carnage had now vanished. We'll kill him too. Wait, Clearsight said suddenly. Two dragons froze, craning their necks to see her. I think there's a reason you'll want both of us. The younger Magwing hesitated, but the older of the two shrugged. Yes, it's up to Ashfall. We'll take 'em both. I suppose there's no harm in it. Tannerman isn't going to put up much of a fight, will he? No, sir, Tarantula quietly murmured. So much to the plan of taking her in and teaching her our ways instead of the insects, the young one mumbled, grabbing his spear. There's nothing for Clearsight to do other than to let her captors take her away. If she fought back now, she was sure they would use lethal force. The dragons on the other continent would die. As long as her and Tarantula were safe, they would find a way out of this. But they had to be alive for anything to work. As the larger Magwing firmly grabbed Clearsight's arm, prepared to fly up the entry hatch, she took a longing glance back at the Spider and Queen. Silk's home was destroyed. Nearly all of her dragons were dead. Clearsight's heart hurt for the dragon, who had lost everything in mere seconds from an invasion that wasn't even her fault. As 4 dragons flew up the entrance of the abyss, Clearsight let guilt seep its way in her bones. They came here for me, she thought. If I hadn't arrived, they would have no reason to kill those dragons. The Magwings were looking for me. Those dragons didn't deserve to die. Tarantula looked ahead of him to see a dejected Clearsight flapping to the volcano with her captor's merciless grip, nearly making her bleed. She seemed as though she was lost in thought, trying to read the inscriptions of a carving that wasn't there. She looked pained, her brow furrowed. Tarantula couldn't help but think of the dragons he had grown up with, so many of them now gone. Bodies no longer with souls. No chance for rebirth. He wanted to think that not all Magwings were bad. He wanted to hope in the goodness of dragons. But after they had done this, he was starting to feel like it wasn't there. Night had fallen soon after they began their flight across the island. The looming volcano of the distance had inched its way closer every moment. Tarantula thought that the circumstances would make flying there feeling like heading towards impending doom, making his scales crawl. But even in the late moonlight, he couldn't help but admire the beauty of the volcano. Ironic, Tarantula thought to himself, especially if it's the last thing I'll ever see. The flight had gone by in a haze to the young Nightwing. Though her wounds had nearly healed from the warm silk they had been wrapped in, she felt as though they were about to reopen simply from taking flight. All that could be heard was the heavy breathing and air hissing from the ventilators of her captors. But the sight of the volcano as it grew closer seemed to awaken her out of a guilt-induced state. Even at night, it was beautiful. While most dragons probably saw it as the looming specter of death she were eventually engulfed in its shadow, Clearsight saw something different. She saw a natural home, illuminated by the slow-moving lava. Reminded her of the night spent outside with Darkstalker, stargazing beneath the heavens, the warm glow of a campfire acting like a blanket. Clearsight turned her head to see Tarantula gazing up in awe. He'd only ever seen it from afar. To view such a thing up close was truly a mesmerizing experience. It wasn't long until the group landed on some nearby rocks, inches away from the river of lava that seemed to guard the volcano. "You'll need these," one of the Magwing said through his ventilator. He handed Clearsight and Tar their own ventilators, though with fresh air instead of swirling ash and smoke. Smog had already made Clearsight lightheaded, but the moment she put on the mask, it felt like she was back home. Refreshing air filled her lungs, and she noticeably relaxed. Two dragons flew them up to a platform extending to the volcano, and they took off their masks as they entered, air hissing from the destroyed vacuum. "I guess there's no turning back now." Clearsight and Tar walked slowly into the natural opening of the rocks. No one could expect such vast amounts of life in a place that seemed so uninhabited and empty on the outside. But as they entered, dozens of dragons walked along the paths inside. The volcano was massive. Clearsight could only assume it was as large as the smallest kingdom in Pyria. The only openings to the outside were where they had stepped through and the gaping crater hundreds of feet above them. Clearsight glanced around the surrounding floor of the volcano. A small group of dragons played cheerfully as their parents watched and chatted. Other Magwings took off to the bottom floor and flew higher into the air, coming dots to distance as they reached another ledge. Other dragons were cooking meat by a campfire, humming and singing to themselves quietly. Many had brown or gray scales, with others having small painted patterns of rocks, magma droplets, and smoke on visible areas. She watched them with compassion, thinking about the stories and futures of all these families. Each dragon looked wonderful, at least to Clearsight. So she was shocked when the two guards snickered and laughed. Tarantula frowned, watching as some of the Magwings took notice and hid themselves behind rocks. They flew up the different floors of the volcano, seeing different types of dragons as they came higher. More dragons now had painted scenery on their sides. Instead of cooking, they're lounging near small pools of lava and gossiping as the strange dragons were escorted higher. It wasn't until they reached one of the floors nearest the gaping crater that Clearsight saw what you could only assume were the most reputable and favored Magwings. Instead of painted scenery or a lack thereof, the designs on these dragons' scales were colored naturally, just like the guards. They were like gorgeous works of art. One had a volcano billowing smoke displayed on his side. Clearsight watched him, he hissed quietly and turned the other way. He looked disgusted at her. The group finally landed on one of the highest floors, stepping out onto a gigantic ledge. It took a moment for Clearsight to realize that this was the outside of the Queen's throne room, which was carved out of rock, its entrance protected by a dangling animal pelt. "Wait," one of them commanded as Tarantula began to step towards it. He squinted his eyes narrowly, but obeyed. It seemed like an eternity of being stared at by judging Magwings until a dragon emerged from the Queen's throne room. He avoided eye contact, speaking only to the guards. Ashfall said they may enter. The captors nodded, pushing Clearsight and Tarantula in the right direction. The throne room is small, but enough to fit several dragons. And as Clearsight's eyes met the throne, she saw the first glimpse of the Magwing Queen. Queen Ashfall was slightly smaller than Silk. The scales on her side displayed natural artwork of an erupting volcano, and scales that looked like magma droplets seemed to droop from her eyes. Horns were sharp and curved, and sat tall on the throne. Ashfall's saber-toothed fangs made her all the more menacing as she stared down at her prisoners. There were metallic rings around her horns. "What does she call herself?" Ashfall asked, not even glancing at the dragon she was speaking to. "Clearsight. She said she's from some place called Pyria?" Ashfall exhaled through her nose. "So she really is the great savior the Spider Wings won't shut up about." "I'm not," Clearsight said suddenly. Clearsight looked at her with sudden fear, whispered for her to be quiet, but the queen silenced him. You know our language? I do, your majesty. Clearsight saw Tarantula looking away to avoid the queen's gaze, only to see him freeze as he spotted a dragon sitting close to the throne he hadn't even noticed before. She looked much younger, maybe even the age of Clearsight herself. She was brown with 2 lava pool scale artwork on her sides, and but had scales of flowers circling her eyes. She looked at Clearsight and Tarantula with pitying yet curious eyes. She watched and waited. So I suppose there's no use in our original plan, Ashfall said suddenly. When Clearsight faced her with a furrowed brow, she explained. Ever since we went to war with our neighboring tribe, Spiderwings claimed to have a prophecy about a dragon who would come down from the sky and kill us all. They said she would save them from us. They painted her as a hero, but in our story she was always the villain. You don't look like either. Clearsight didn't know quite what to say. Her prophecy powers were working. She could see into all the futures and find out one where she and Tar made it out safely. She could save all the dragons from the faraway land. Without it, Clearsight felt endlessly trapped. She didn't know what choice would lead to what. Why did my powers disappear after I saw those strange dragons for the first time? Much to her surprise, however, she did not need to reply. Dragonette sitting next to Ashfall spoke softly. Mother, why don't you let her tell us who she is? The room fell silent, with the only sound that could be heard being the breathing through Clearsight and Tar's ventilators. Ashfall looked shocked at her daughter's response, but clearly took it into consideration. Who are you, then? She asked. I am Clearsight, Nightwing from Pyria. I had received a vision many days ago about a tribe in need. There's a deadly storm coming, and I'm afraid that they will perish in it. I took off my homeland in an attempt to save them, but my powers and mine went blank. On the way, the storm must have knocked me off path. I'm not where I meant to be, and I'm so sorry for arriving on your land. Ashfall sat silently, deep in thought. Before she could open her mouth to speak, however, Magwing Princess interjected once more. What is the land you're meant to save like? Clearsight had not been anticipating the question, but was happy to answer it. It seems like a great place. The families happily sit in trees and along the beach, singing cheerfully. They all seemed so happy. The princess seemed in awe at the thought. She looked down at the thin beaded necklaces she was wearing, winding them through her talons. Clearsight saw Tarantula watching her, his gaze soft. She almost wanted to smile at the sight. It was oddly adorable. She was a pretty dragonette. We cannot train you in the way of the Magwings, Ashfall began. Then we must kill you. Even if you aren't the great savior, the Spiderwings will be crushed thinking she's dead. Silk owes me greatly for what she did to my tribe. She has already paid the deaths of many. That is not enough for what I wish to come to her. The unrest between the tribes felt like it could be felt, like an invisible wall separating the room. Tarantula was now looking down. It was the princess' turn to stare at him softly. Caldera, you may leave if you do not wish to witness the execution. But, Mamma, silence. While I think it would do you well to see what happens to those who fight against us and kill our dragons, I know you do not believe yourself ready, though I fear you will not be ready forever. Ashfall closed her eyes. Caldera looked longingly and panicked at the 2 prisoners. Clearsight could nearly see her heart beating out of its chest. She looked in pain. Her large, round dove eyes conveyed 1,000 words, that condensed them all down to, I'm sorry. Tarantula's eyes widened, watching her. Mamma, I'll stay, Caldera said at last. Ashfall reopened her eyes, a look of relief taking over. Then I shall have no reason to hesitate. Magwing Queen hunched over, allowing her throat to collect all the surrounding warmth. It glowed a strong orange, the heat and fire bubbling from deep inside. But a split second before it could escape from within, Caldera opened her mouth quicker. Thick smoke poured from her, temporarily blinding Ashfall. She screeched, clutching onto the armrest of the throne as her eyes desperately watered. Nearby Magwings rushed near at the commotion, whispering amongst themselves. Run! Caldera did not need to say it twice. Clearsight took hold of Tarantula's arm, though he couldn't take his eyes off the princess. I'm coming. Do not worry for me, she said. After shooting one final smoky blast, Caldera took off alongside the prisoner pair. They moved as quickly as lightning, descending down the floors of the volcano. Over their shoulders, they could each catch a glimpse of several Magwing guards following suit. "Follow me!" Caldera shouted, pointing to one of the ledges. Clairside and Tarantula dove after her, making their way through a secret carved entrance in the rock. Caldera reached out a claw to stop them momentarily. Looking down, Clairside saw a smooth rock slide leading down below. "That slide circles all the floors of the volcano," Caldera said, panting. "It was made for elderly and prisoners. If you take it down, you'll get to the bottom. From there, it's not that far until you reach where you entered from." Tarantula looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "Why are you saving us?" Caldera averted his gaze. "Because I'm scared my mother will do something she'll regret. This war, it has taken everything from our tribe, and yours too." Tears stung in her eyes. "Clairside, I don't know you, but if what you said is true about saving dragons, then I know it's worth saving you. The place you spoke of doesn't deserve to be destroyed. It reminds me of the stories I've been told about what this island once was. Before it mattered whether you were a Spiderwing or a Magwing. I don't want anyone else to have to go through all that death. I want a land where dragons can be happy. That is what I hope you are protecting." Clairside looked deep into her eyes. "I can promise you that place will be safe." Caldera gave a small smile. The volcano shook as talons landed nearby. "You must go," the princess urged. "Both of you." "No," Tarantula said. "I'm not going. This is my home too. If you think we have any chance of saving it, then I'd say it's worth fighting for." Caldera looked in with affectionate eyes. "You're different, Spider Dragon. I think someone like you could help prove my mother and everyone else wrong about this. There's good in her. She just hides it deep down, locked away because of the pain. But I think we can change that." Clairside looked at the two of them. They seemed happy, even amidst all the suffering. Maybe I can learn something from them, Clairside thought. Even though things don't always quite turn out the way I hoped, it's never impossible to fight for happiness. It's never impossible to have a new beginning. And with that, Clairside let go of her lingering thoughts of Darkstalker. She let go of the aching pain, and her heart fluttered with a sense of freedom, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The moment she did so, a vision came to her. The continent with the strange dragons was back, only the storm was gone. Here she was, older, sitting among a group of tiny dragonets. They giggled, smiling up at her. She was telling them a story. After she was done, she handed one of them the small beaded necklace she had been wearing. Clairside came back to reality, but the vision stuck with her. That is what I am fighting to protect, and it's what they are too. Newfound determination filled her. This was not a future, it was the future, and a happy one, a free one, just like she had hoped. Clairside looked at Tarantula and Caldera one final time. "Thank you both for everything you have done, and thank you for fighting. Little dragonets of the future are going to thank you for that." They smiled at her. Caldera laid an arm on Clairside's shoulder. Suddenly, her eyes flung wide open. Quickly took off one of the necklaces she'd been wearing, placing it around the Nightwing's neck. "For you." Clairside's face lit up in a smile as she looked down at the gift that had been given to her. With one final goodbye, she slid down into the darkness as the Magwing guards circled her friends. But even without searching her vision, she had a feeling they'd be all right. Ashwell was stubborn and hurt, but not heartless. As Clairside took off into the sunrise, she felt no need to glance back at the volcano. They were going to be okay. It would take time, but peace had finally come to this land again. Now, as Clairside took off into the sunrise, she knew one thing. She was going to save these dragons. Wow, I finally got this finished. After a ton of procrastination, I powered through. I'm honestly pretty proud of how this one went. And while I wish I could have explored the Spiderwings and Magwings more, I did what I could. If you want to learn more about them, feel free to check out the video in which I created Wings of Fire Tribe using emojis. But thank you all so much for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!